So there you go. I'm John Kane, and I welcome you to Let's Talk Native on this Tuesday, April 21st, 2020. While this program may not provide a path to spiritual enlightenment, we do encourage and in some cases start conversations. We kind of break the rules here for Native Radio. We don't do prayers and we don't do buffalo speeches. We take a tough look at history, oppression, and survival. We talk about culture, the arts, politics, and identity. And we do step on a few toes along the way. But our real goal here is to bring people together by breaking down what separates us. We will take on the false narratives and provide critical thinking that all that is heaped upon us, and we do it all right here live from the Cattaraugus territory of the Seneca Nation. So let's talk Native. But first, let me remind people that our audio streams live on our website, which is www.letstalknative.com. We stream live video of the show on Facebook Live, on a bunch of Facebook group pages. We take the audio and we put it up on SoundCloud, which puts it out as a podcast on your favorite podcast platforms. And we take the video and we put it up on our YouTube channel, which is Let's Talk Native TV. I suggest that you recommend that you subscribe to our podcasts on whatever platform, and that you subscribe to our YouTube channel as well. And that way you can catch a lot of the videos we do, not just the show videos, but other videos that we do as well. All right, I'm the show's host and producer, and I'm joined here in studio by Jake Proud, who's managing our audio and our video. Well, let me get into it. We'll start, like as we have been lately, with some numbers. Of course, they're never good, but I try to not just offer some of the numbers that I can pick up, anybody can off of the internet, but also try to put some perspective to them. Over 800,000 cases in the United States. There is just about 26,000 new cases today. The death total is over 45,000. And today was actually a record breaker. Today was the highest single amount of deaths for one day, 2,804. I know they've adjusted some numbers looking back, but looking at the graphs and the charts and everything, this is actually the highest single day for loss of lives due to the coronavirus. So those numbers aren't good, and and while the new cases for the day is a number that's kind of down at about 26,000. It's been as high as 33,000, I think, for a single day. The death count's still still very high. Now at 45,000 now that have perished because of this, that means next week at this time, the number will have reached to 60,000 that Fauci and Birx have had lowered the expectation for the total number of deaths by this virus. I'm still baffled that when they put out an estimate between 100 and 200,000 people that they expected to die from this, why just last week or a week and a half ago they decided, okay, we're not just going to go with the low number, the 100,000, we're going to lower it yet. When I do the show next week on Tuesday, I'm pretty certain, based on the amount of deaths per day, that this will be over 60,000, maybe even be closer to the 65,000 mark by this time next week. So again, 100,000, and I gotta always say this, and most of these numbers, it used to be all the numbers, but most of these numbers are still based on people who were tested and then perished. Now they have started adding in some of the deaths that were obviously caused by this, and is written on their death certificate as cause of death, or one of the contributing causes of death. So they add that to not only the death count, but also the case count. And that's why if you watch this stuff as I do during the day, you see the numbers change during the day because they have different blocks of numbers that they get. Navajo territory, which is at this point has more cases than 8 states in the United States. The Navajo have more cases at 1,321 than 8 of the United States. I mean, that's absurd. And as a percentage of their population, only New York and New Jersey have a higher infection rate than the Navajo territory. And again, I gotta always put this back here. This is all based on the limited amount of testing that's been done. Today, in the United States, 1.3% of the population has been tested. So all of these numbers are still being drawn from a very small percentage of the population. But again, Navajo territory, 1,321 cases and 45 deaths. And again, these numbers update at different times. So if somebody says, "Well, I heard the number is higher than that," well, it may be, but these are the numbers that are posted on Worldometer and some of the sites that I look at. It's pretty disturbing, and again, as I hear people talk about things like reaching a plateau, I said it last show. When you're measuring floodwaters and you reach the crest and you're at the crest, you don't start making plans for moving back until the floodwaters recede. Right now, maybe the U.S. may be at the crest of this wave of this flood, but it certainly hasn't receded. It's if you want to consider the curve to have been flattened, it certainly hasn't gone down now. And with all of these nut jobs who went out in the past several days, protesting against their lockdown, they're claiming that they need to be liberated. And yes, Donald Trump was advocating liberate Texas, liberate Virginia, liberate Michigan. He was doing all of this stuff on Twitter. So all these guys who decided that they need to go out and stand up for their personal liberties at the risk of everybody else's health, they may ultimately cause a spike, and we won't even know that. We won't even know for a few days. So whatever took place between, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, yesterday, it won't be till, for a few days till we learn whether that social gathering in any way, shape, or form will have caused a spike. But I don't know. There you have it. I don't know. We'll see how that plays out. Again, my recommendation first and foremost is to make sure that the elderly are as isolated as possible. And I don't mean just in nursing homes or in senior living facilities in general, but even in your home. If you have somebody who's elderly in your home, and again, I'm 60. I know that's supposed to be in the risk zone, but I'm saying if you're older than me and you have an underlying condition, and look, if you have family in that circumstance, you should do everything you can to make sure that there isn't traffic. Don't go to a protest to protest open up New York State and then go bring lunch home to grandma. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense, folks. I'm not sure if the idea of slowing the spread ultimately is going to have the desired effect that people hope it does. But I will say, if there is a population you want to isolate and try to keep from getting infected, even if you believe all the herd immunity stuff, which I don't necessarily, but you shouldn't be including. I saw some of these people at these protests saying, sacrifice the weak. I saw this woman carrying a sign saying, sacrifice the weak. I mean, what is going through the heads of these people? And which is going to bring me to what I'm going to talk about through most of the show today. I'm going to talk about the heinous acts that are associated with religion, Christianity in particular. Now, whether you're a Christian or not, you can decide what you believe in, but there's no question that there are certain activities that have been done in the name of that religion. Now, what people have to figure out is the religion the foundation of all of these crimes? Or is your belief in this altruistic, religious order, are you the one that's being duped? And so we're going to talk about it. I'm going to go through a little bit of history, and it brings it current because you look, a lot of these people who are out there protesting, they are the evangelical right. And some of those are the ones carrying signs say, sacrifice the weak for the good of the economy. I mean, that's literally what some of these people are saying. I mean, it's bizarre. So I'm going to get into that, but I did want to again do some of the numbers. Like I said, and if I'm wrong, I'm gonna look. I'll make a big deal of it next Tuesday. So next week when I come in here, and we got shows between then, but next week when I come in here, if we haven't seen 60,000 The number that Trump's doctors now, their experts, have predicted was going to be the total loss of life, and I'm saying we're not even close to the end of the game on this thing. But if I'm wrong, I'll admit that I'm wrong, and I'll question. I'll give the numbers as they're coming to me. I do question some of the numbers right now. I think they're probably well over 60,000 already, frankly. Probably close to 100,000 already. Because again, the overwhelming majority of this 45,000 they have listed as dead come only from the list of those people who have been tested. 1.3% of the population. Not quite 1.3% of the population. So the numbers are really, really difficult. On that note, I will say this coming Thursday on my New York show, I've got a friend of mine that's joining me. Some of you may recall I had Ben Carnes on my show. Ironically, we were talking about religion. We were talking about the fact that the Choctaw had declared that they were a Christian nation, and so Ben came on to talk about that. Well, Ben is a friend of mine, had been a friend of mine for a long time, and he lost his battle with cancer back in January. And his surviving wife, Kat, has been, obviously she's been going through her own process, of grief and that kind of thing. But she's a nurse, and she decided to take on, one of these jobs where you're as a traveling nurse, you go into a crisis zone. So she's in New York. Her and one of her friends from home went to New York to be, one of these crisis nurses, as they call them. And so she's going to join me on my show in New York, and we're going to talk about, we'll probably talk a little bit about Ben, her process of grieving, and how she decided that the best way for her to kind of repurpose her life at this point, after living with somebody struggling with cancer for as long as she had, has taken her to New York, and she's going to give us some insight into that. So that's Kat Carnes that'll be joining me on my show in New York. That's WBAI. That's Thursdays from 3 to 5. And then the following week, I'm going to have Bob Henley, who is a investigative journalist, writes for a number of papers in the New York City and New Jersey area, and does radio. He's a regular on WBAI. He's going to join me as well the following week, and we're going to talk about some of these numbers because he's delved into it as a reporter. He can pull up a lot of information that I probably could if I knew how, but this is what he does as an investigative journalist. So I just want to throw those out there just to kind of whet somebody's appetite for what we're talking about here. All right, so let me get into it. One of the reasons that I wanted to talk about this stuff today. Now, first off, obviously, COVID-19 can dominate every conversation, and even that kind of works its way into this conversation. But I had a conversation with somebody, it was either today or yesterday, and I was talking about how when Columbus's men, made it to the Caribbean, and they went about the murder, the savage, the Holocaust that they brought to the native people. Some of what they did and was done in a religious theme. So when they murdered people, when they would actually crucify native people. So they'd build a cross and they'd nail them to a cross, and then they would burn them on the cross. Now, there's no reason to do this within, there's no sacrament, under the Catholic Church to burn people at the stake. But they would do it. And in fact, some of the religious leaders, Bartolome de las Casas and others who were witness some of this stuff, they wrote in their journals and they were appalled by it. But this is what these Spanish conquistadors or whatever, the people loyal to the Spanish crown were doing. They would actually name them to the extent they could remember who the 12 apostles were. They would give these native people an apostle's name, and then whoever might have been more of a leader, they would prop them up as Jesus himself, and they would burn them on a cross. So the question was, and when I came in to do the show, I said, I want to talk about the mockery, the making a mockery of religion. And so, Jake and I were talking earlier, and the question is, was that mocking the religion, or was that actually imitating the religion, not in as a form of mockery, but is that what Christianity was or is? is the perpetration of these kinds of acts. Is that part of the religion? Now, I know, and I've had many conversations with people who are Christians, some of them who are devoted Christians, who say, look, all of those things, those terrible things that have been done in the name of Christianity, those weren't Christians. And I'm thinking, okay, maybe they weren't, but maybe you're the one that's duped. And when I look at Native people, for instance, or black people, when I think about what has been done to Native people and to and to black people in terms of slavery and all of this stuff, how is it that we turn around and we embrace the very religion that was used as the rationale for enslaving or for murdering or for stealing land and then there's all the other things that are done by these so-called pious men, right? These people who were out discovering new worlds to spread Christendom. Then why did it begin with the spreading of venereal disease? So when we talk about, and I'm going to move all the way up into the clergy sex abuse stuff, but right from the beginning, you had this mix of rape, the rape culture that came from these Christian nations of Europe, and it's not like the so-called religious figures, these bishops or whatever that made it to South America and the Caribbean and to the New World or whatever else. They weren't exactly holding anybody back, and in fact, some of what took place even with Junipero Serra going out to California territory, the western coast of western part of Turtle Island. Some of the crimes committed by him and his men, because this was always done with men. It's kind of like the man camps, men who are away from their families, so they could do things to women and children that you would think a civilized society would be opposed to. So there is this debate, and I'm even wrestling with it myself. What is Christianity? Is it the altruistic belief and all the things that the Christians want to cling to as the good versus the evil? Or did religion create the good and evil construct in the first place, which I think is probably true? And to create the good and evil construct, you had to have good and evil even within the church. So, I start from this place, and again, I always mention, and I'm a big advocate of watching this film, Even the Rain. Even the Rain was a good example of the way they depicted what Columbus and his men had done to the native people. And look, and my good friends Sheldon Wolfchild and Stephen Newcomb, when they did the Doctrine of Discovery film, Newcomb had I can't think of his first name, but Rivera was one of the authors he had on an interview, and they talked about the fact that they did these religious sacraments. Of course, they put the flag in the ground and they declared that it was for, for the Spanish crown or whatever else. And they say they baptized the land. But then you realize those people weren't pious. They weren't religious. They weren't of a religious order. And in fact, the crimes that they committed against those people was either a mockery of the so-called good that the church is supposed to represent, or it's not. Or it's really what was talked about in the Doctrine of Discovery film was when the Christian nations of Europe realized, look, there were other ways to convert people other than just trying to preach to them, other than trying to teach them about the Bible. You could do it with a sword, and you could do it with murder. You could do it with disease, and so that's became part of the idea of spreading Christianity. So there's a part of me that wrestles with this whole notion that Native people and Black people are among the more, certainly are among the more religious people. Especially when you look into what is called Latin America or whatever else, because most of the brown people who live through Central and South America are indigenous people who have had their culture stripped away from them. They speak Spanish. Many of them speak Spanish, and many of them are Catholics. In spite of what Catholicism was, how it was used to oppress them and murder them even. But it isn't just about colonization. Consider the Ku Klux Klan and the vicious and the murderous things they did to blacks and Jews and others, Native people. Yeah, we battled the KKK too. You can talk about the Tuscarora down in the Carolinas and how they pushed out and how they fought back against the KKK. Because as far as the KKK was concerned, Native people and black people were the same. And I don't even have a problem having that analogy made, but it was the Tuscarora who fought back against the KKK and pushed them out of the region. So, I mean, think about what the KKK does and the symbolism. Their white power, their white supremacy symbol. It's a cross. They connect, even though Jesus wasn't even white. They connect the whole idea of white supremacy with Christianity. They burned crosses on people's yards. They burned up businesses and homes and murdered people, lynched people, and they did it in the name of their religion. Now again, we can argue that those people were evil and that somehow the devil had made it into within the ranks of the church, or not. I mean, and so I don't know who are the good Christians, the altruistic believers. Are they the ones that are duped, or is the ones who are committing these crimes have they lost their way? I don't know. All I know is that there's a lot of stuff that has been done in the name of religion. Terrible crimes against humanity. Residential schools. There you go. Residential schools. Think about the crimes that were committed. Both deviant sex crimes, the torture, the abuse. And look, I know people who've gone to Catholic schools and said, yes, those nuns were all sadistic. Well, how does that fit in? How does this idea of these people who claim to be, clergy, people who claim to be of a religious order, how is it they could be these mean bitches beating the crap out of kids? And look, kids lost their lives in these residential schools. And it wasn't just Catholics. It was a bunch of the denominations. And they lost their lives through neglect, through abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, mental abuse. They also lost their lives because diseases were allowed to spread. Tuberculosis, at some point in the Canadian press, they were writing that there was a 50% mortality rate for kids in the Indian residential schools, just as a result of tuberculosis. They knew how to quarantine back then. So when I look back at how disease, and again, starting initially with venereal disease because of the rape culture, then there's all the other diseases that were spread, some of intentionally. Smallpox blanket's not a myth. I know some people are saying, the smallpox can't really be spread by a blanket. Well, that's not true. I mean, again, there's always going to be somebody try to suggest. I mean, it was clearly the intent to share disease blankets with Native people. Lord Jeffrey Amherst, New York is named after him. Amherst, Massachusetts is named after him. So there again, these were these religious, pious men, and of course, we won't even get into how much women have been abused in the name of the church, or oppressed in the name of the church. I mean, it's real easy for people to say, "Oh, look at how those Muslim people treat their women." Well, what the hell do you think Christians were doing? The Christian men were doing to their women. Being married was like you became a personal property of a man under the church, and of course you had this whole culture around it. Look, you don't have to talk about the stranger religions like Seventh-day Adventist or Mormonism or any of that. Look, this was right across the board with all of them. And again, what Native kids experience in residential schools, those are crimes. That wasn't just bad policy. It was criminal. There were children that were raped and murdered. There were children that died from neglect, malnutrition, refusing health care. And of course, there was the kids who died, like Cheney Winjack, died trying to leave, died, of exposure on the railroad tracks as a 12-year-old boy. These are crimes committed by the church in the name of the church. All right, the clergy sex abuse. How the hell does that? I mean, there's no place in the Bible that advocates that. Yet the entire system of church, from the Catholics, from the local churches all the way up to the Vatican, have covered this thing up. They've all made a mockery of everything they claim to represent with how they handled this. And it's not just the Catholics. The Baptists are going through the same thing. How is the raping of little boys and girls, how by the clergy themselves? And of course, there was also nuns that were raped. All of this stuff is going on. Now, we can get into the debate on what was consensual and what wasn't. I don't know, when you have this idea of these religious cultures that are of submission, cultures of submission, I don't know how you say anything. I mean, look, if you have sex with a slave, somebody who you enslaved, somebody who you claim to own, that person doesn't consent. That's not consensual sex. If you believe you own that person because you've enslaved them. Thomas Jefferson raped Sally Hemings. Yeah, it's called rape. She didn't have any choice in the matter. All right, hey, we're at the bottom of the hour, so we'll take a break and I'll come back, and I got a few other things to talk. I want to push on this a little bit harder. I know I've got to have some people going nuts here, because there are Native people who are deeply religious and deeply committed to some of this stuff. But I want to go a little farther with it, and we'll do that when we come back. This is John Kane, and this is Let's Talk Native. All right, thanks for coming back. This is John Kane. Hey, I want to thank our sponsors. I want to thank Ross and Holly John and the RJE family of businesses for supporting the program, the folks at Grand River Enterprises and Native Wholesale Supply, and others who help when they can, and I appreciate that. Some are just individuals who listen to the show, listen to the podcast, and they listen to the show in New York. Others are businesses that, when things are going well, they support the program, and I greatly appreciate it. That's how we do what we do here. And look, we do 3 shows a week. We do 2 Let's Talk Native shows, and I do a 2-hour show that broadcasts in New York City, and we do it here from the studio, and we do it because we have sponsors. And, we wouldn't be able to do it without you, put it that way. We do it because we want to have these conversations, but we can't do it without the support that we have from from a few businesses and a few listeners, and I greatly appreciate I appreciate the support. Look, I also want to thank the folks who share the program, whether you share the Facebook live stream while it's live or after the fact, whether you share the podcast or the YouTube videos. I appreciate it all. And look, and I also look forward to reading your comments and in going back and forth. There's a few people that I mix it up with. Some can be a little bit antagonistic, I guess, but most of the listeners, they either want more information or they want to know where some of the info comes from, and so that's where we go with it. Look, on the subject that I've been talking about, I also get troubled when religious leaders or people who claim to be leaders within the religious community try to take the lead on certain things, while failing to recognize, again, look, if you're a civil rights leader, look, even Martin Luther King, if you're a civil rights leader and yet you're an ordained minister, how do you not address the church's role in any of this stuff? I mean, you can get into what is and isn't a good Christian, and that's where some of the stuff gets. I mean, Mark Charles, the guy who's trying to maintain a campaign for presidency. He was literally trying to use the doctrine of Christian discovery as some vehicle to either claim that the Christians who were involved in the doctrine of Christian discovery were not real Christians. I don't know if they're suggesting that somehow Satan worked into that thing. But look, what the churches had done in utilizing this idea of looking at Native people as somehow subhuman, I mean, the answer to that, centuries of that treatment isn't to say, oh, we should just become part of them now, we the people. I mean, the argument, the reason for exposing the doctrine of Christian discovery is not so we can become a part of the Christian family. It's to assert our right that we don't have to. And it's to assert that what they did in the name of Christianity was wrong. That doesn't mean, okay, once we make that statement, now we can become good Christians. I mean, I'm troubled by, some of these people who get out there and in the name of their faith will advocate an issue. Whether, whether it's, the controversial issues like gay marriage or abortion, which is a crazy conversation to have in the name of church beliefs, I guess. But even the Christian right and the role the place they take with capitalism and the exploitation of the planet. Look, I realize if you go through the Bible, you can find a verse that'll support any kind of heinous behavior you want. That's what what do they call that? What was that Baptist church there? The one with the Phelps there, the guys who used to show. Oh, Westboro Baptist Church. Yeah, the daughter who's now written a book about this. She said, look, her father could find chapter and verse to support every ridiculous belief that this group had, and it's true. You can go through that Bible. You can find everything that can justify killing people. You can justify hating, Jews, hating gays, hating blacks, hating browns, hating whatever. You can justify. You can find any place in there to support hating people. Deuteronomy, Deuteronomy 7 is a perfect example of the Old Testament where it talks about how you have to destroy that culture, destroy their altars, destroy anybody else's belief system. And of course, a lot of this stuff is based on who the chosen people are. And I know other cultures do it too. I mean, look, all three of the so-called religions of Abraham, Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, they both have some real foundational problems, or all three of them, I should say. But Christianity is the one that dominates the landscape here. And I'm oftentimes beside myself trying to understand why. And I'm not saying that if you're black, that the only way to oppose Christianity is become a Muslim. I'm not even suggesting that. But I'll tell you, I find myself more aligned with the words of somebody like Malcolm X than I do with Martin Luther King. I'm sorry, the whole idea, the dream speech. I mean, if you ever listen or read that whole I have a dream. He condemns a country for not living up to its creed. When they wrote that all men were created equal, they didn't mean all people. They meant all white men were created equal. They lived up to that creed. I argue that that the Constitution and the Bible, they do exactly what they're intended to do. Oppress people. And don't tell me that that the Bible is being taken out of context. I'm sure it is, but I'm not sure who's taking it out of context. Maybe those altruistic believers in the faith, maybe they're taking the stuff out of context. I don't know. I guess it depends on how much Old Testament, how much New Testament. Somebody once told me the New Testament was supposed to replace the Old Testament, so you have to disregard all the wrathful God stuff, all the hate and all the killing and all the plagues and all that. You got to dismiss all this because now you only have to. Now it's only the New Testament. Well, man, we've experienced that in Native territory. I've had people say the same thing about Gardiwillo and the Great Law. I don't, look. All I know is that there has been some of the worst crimes in the history of man have been done in the name of religion. And Christianity was a main part of all of it. So whether you're talking about the blood feuds between the Irish and the British, or the Scottish, or whether you're talking about what the crimes that were committed against the Jews or against Native people, but even dropping atomic bombs and that kind of stuff. There's this idea that there's some sort of religious ordaining of any of this activity, killing in the name of God, righteous killing. It's a crazy world, and so, and again, even to bring it around, I guess, many of the people you saw protesting, and think about, I said this on the last show. It's crazy that this whole idea of locking things down and social distancing and stay-at-home orders, nothing is that strictly, or nobody's been arrested for leaving their home. I don't know, and I don't think anybody's been arrested for violating a curfew, at least not to my knowledge, anyway. And trust me, the ones that there'll be people of color. But this has only been going on for a month. A month of staying home with your family has made some of these white people lose their freaking minds. And of course they'll say, yeah, but I can't even go to church. Most of you weren't going to church anyway. Now that you can't, you'll already say, oh yeah, but it was Easter. That was the one day a year that I go to church. It's some of this stuff is bizarre. And so when I see some of this evangelical right, again, spewing hate and conspiracies and, that this is all about taking something away from them. Man, you've been asked to stay home for a few weeks. Yeah, I guess this is like when you go on vacation and you can't wait to go back to work because you couldn't stand spending 2 weeks with your family. This is worse because people had to spend 4 weeks or 5 weeks with their family, and people are going this crazy over it. It's pretty remarkable. All right, I'm going to shift gears once again. One of the things that hit the news is, do you remember when Donald Trump was trying to suggest that they had this new miracle cure that was going to be the game changer, as he called it? It was hydroxychloroquine used in combination with azithromycin. One of them was a malaria drug, and one of them is a powerful antibiotic. And there was some anecdotal evidence, I guess, although the word evidence might be overused here, suggesting that it had some success in helping some people. Well, the National Institute of Health has now come out strongly against using this combination of drugs. It causes heart attacks. Now, it doesn't mean if you take it, you're going to have a heart attack. It just means that it not only is it one of the side effects, but it's an increased side effect. And there's been case after case after case. It doesn't show any real promise in terms of curing somebody of COVID-19, but the side effects they've been causing deaths. So Trump's he literally was telling people, what do you got to lose? Take it. Just take it. I'd take it. He goes, if I'd take it, he goes, of course you got to ask your doctors. But then he says, but then he goes and he doubles down on it over and over again. Now, he hasn't talked about it at all for the last week and a half. Well, last week anyway. Well, now it's kind of come out in the news that, look, it isn't the game changer. It was a game changer for a few people because a few people got killed taking this stuff. But it is not a game changer in terms of a cure for COVID-19. And even, last week there was all the buzz because one of these pharmaceutical companies has a medication that was showing promise. It was an intravenous medication. It was called remdesivir. And the stock market jumped up like 600 points because there was an initial report, not a clinical trial. And that's the crazy part. They start promoting these medications before they've ever even tested them. You can't do a clinical trial if you don't do a blind. You've got to test an equal amount of people who take the drug and an equal amount that don't take the drug, none of them knowing who's got it, who does it. And then you've got to see, that's called a double blind test. If you don't do it in that way, you have no idea. Look, some people may recover because they were going to recover anyway. Not everybody dies of COVID-19. So in order to do a testing, you've got to do it in a way that you can really extrapolate, information from it. So this medication, the National Institute of Health is not recommending this one either. Now, look, they're still doing trials, and maybe it does show some problems. But again, they're being real clear. This is not a game changer. This is not a drug that's ever going to be widely available for the the mass population, or certainly even all those people on ventilators. It's not that available, and it's an intravenous drug, so it's not something that you're going to use on just anybody. So again, I hate to bust anybody's bubble, but all the stuff that Trump tries to distract you with like cures and all these the smoke and mirrors. Look, even some of the testing, they're finding increasing problems with reliable antibody testing. You know why? Because they lowered the standards for what those tests, the standards that those tests have to meet. So now you got companies all over the world, especially in China. And again, I'm not picking on China, but people know there's a lot of money to be made if you can come up with these tests. And they dropped the bar in terms of how accurate the tests have to be and what the testing has to be for the test. So now there's tests on the market. People are buying them and using them, and they're not reliable. I'll tell you another test is not reliable. It turns out that the tests that they use for testing for the coronavirus, the one that they can get an answer back in 15 minutes, it's only about 85% reliable. It's got like over 15% false negatives. Well, I got to tell you, if you're going to use these tests to determine whether a healthcare worker can treat old people in a nursing home, and you have 15% false negatives, then you're not screening people accurately enough to protect the elderly in these nursing homes. So, look, while Trump will stand up every single day and talk about how he has managed this crisis perfectly, that's one of his favorite words, perfect, and that he is the envy, and that the United States is the envy of the world because of his leadership, no, it's not. It's not the envy of the world. Most people cannot believe a country like the United States has been devastated by this pandemic. I would think that most countries of the world thought the United States would have a level of preparedness that would have been able to keep them from. China hasn't had the problems that the United States has. China's got 1.5 billion people. But the United States leads in every category you don't want to lead in. 2.5 million people infected with have been infected with the disease. Some of them have recovered. The amount of people that have died is over 70,000 people have died throughout the world. But in the United States, 800,000 people infected and 45,000 dead. I don't think that makes the United States the envy of the world. So I just wanted to give a little bit more information on this stuff, because look, we're fed a lot of false information, and and this idea. When Trump was first talking about it, he couldn't understand that a vaccine couldn't be ready in a couple of weeks or a couple of months. That's how clueless this guy was or is. And so any little thing that he can hang on to try to distract, people from the reality of what's going on with this thing. And I know there's a lot of people out there who think that this whole thing is a hoax. And that's why so many people are out there, with these protests and that kind of stuff. But, look, I know a lot of Native people think it's all a hoax too. But look, it's gotten to the point where you probably know somebody who's gotten this disease. And before this is all done, you're going to know somebody who died. And that's just the reality. It's just too many people. 45,000 people in 2 months, essentially in 2 months in the United States. I mean, so all those people who want to claim these big numbers of people who die with the flu, and let's keep in mind, all those numbers that people associate with dying of the flu in last year or the year before, or the year before, or the year before, the rigid testing to determine whether they were tested for the flu or whether a doctor treated them for the flu and they perished, then the cause of death goes down as the flu. Or the flu is considered one of the underlying causes of the death. But right now, almost all the people who are of that 45,000 dead in the United States are only from those who were tested. It's only recently started adding other people. So when you go, nobody has done, like I said, a complete overlay of how many deaths in the United States there's been in the last 2 months, laying that over the same time period last year. That, to me, is going to be a more accurate description of people who either died from the disease or, look, there's direct and indirect ways of dying from this disease. And I say this, there's probably a lot of people who just refuse to go to the hospital out of fear that that's where the disease is. Or out of the fear that has been conjured up because people said, "Oh, we're having such a run at the hospitals that it's all chaos." And look, and I'm not saying this to condemn healthcare workers. That has to be the least envious job, in the entire world right now. When I hear that what doctors and nurses and EMTs are going through, I mean, the rest of us can't even imagine what that's got to be like. But to downplay this thing and to say that it's false, or that, oh, I'm not going to wear a mask. Well, if you don't wear a mask, I sure hope you don't go near anybody who's vulnerable after you've exposed yourself. That's really all I can say, because there is no cure. The only treatment is doing whatever they can do to keep you alive until your own immune system can beat it, or it doesn't. And again, I said this. I asked this question early on in this discussion on these issues. I wondered, what's the survival rate once you get put on a ventilator? And Cuomo has mentioned this multiple times over the last several weeks. By the time you need to be put on a ventilator, you've only got a 20% chance of survival. Now, look, I'm not trying to scare anybody whose loved ones are on a ventilator. 20% is still something to hope, to give you hope. But this is not. There is no great treatment for this. The greatest treatment is just what your body can do to fight it. And then, and if you think that the only hope you have relies in your faith, and that the only way you can practice that faith is to gather in group worship, or to stand side by side with people in these protests because they're part of your evangelical group or cult or whatever you want to call it, man, just spend some time with your families and do the things that are smart. Look, many people are going to get this, are going to get these infected by this no matter what. But the more you can slow the spread down, the more you have people around you who can help. But if everybody's gasping for breath, if hospitals are overwhelmed, if everybody is fighting the same ailment, then there's nobody to help those of us who may be battling it. So that's why I get the whole idea of flattening the curve. But what you have to realize is, by slowing the spread, you're also prolonging the whole cycle of infection. Not individually, but as it goes through the population. And like I said earlier in the show, the floodwaters have not gone down yet. The flood of this disease is still riding its peak. It may have crested, but when you reach the crest of that flood, is not the time to hail that it's over. You're still underwater. There's a long way to go before this thing drops down in terms of number of cases and number of deaths. Today broke a record. The highest number of deaths in a single day today in the United States. 2,800 people. So don't tell me this thing is over. And don't tell me that this thing is going to only take 60,000 lives. We'll talk about that next Tuesday. Because unless something dramatically changes within the next few days, look, today was almost a 3,000 death day. At 2,000 a day, they'll reach 60,000 by next week. Now, the 100,000, that might be a hopeful goal, but I don't know how they can keep it to 100,000. I don't think 200,000 may be realistic. Fauci and Birx should have upped their estimate, not lowered it. See, this is the problem. When science starts being manipulated and the evidence starts being manipulated so you can make the case you want to make, rather than taking the information and saying, this is where the science is leading me. Look, it's kind of the difference between law and science, right? Law says, I'm going to grab every piece of evidence I can that's going to prove my case, whether somebody's guilty or innocent. There's nobody who says, well, let's gather all the information and just figure out what the evidence says. No, you've got people hiding evidence and manipulating evidence and trying to make their case. Well, that science has turned out to be the same thing. It's not supposed to be that way. The way it's supposed to be is you gather the evidence and you let the evidence takes you to a conclusion. You don't have a conclusion. I want to get people back to work, so let's get all the evidence that's going to allow me to put people back to work. No, that's not the way science works. I mean, it's absurd what I'm seeing being done at every level, and even the people that are being considered reliable. Cuomo, Fauci, and Birx? No, I'm sorry. I see even these people are saying are reliable compared to Trump. Look, compared to Trump, a toddler's more reliable in dealing with this issue. So that's a pretty low standard. We all have to think critically here. And look, I know I've had people say, well, you're no expert to be talking about this stuff. Well, I can read 3 lines on a graph as well as anybody. So that's not tough. That's not tough science. And if you look at the numbers that are being produced every single day, I just for the life of me can't figure out how anybody could have said, look, we're going to come off of that 100,000 to 200,000 dead, and we're going to lower it down to 60,000. Well, you could say that, but that doesn't mean, just because you said it doesn't mean it's going to be true. Like I said, 60,000 we reach before we come back here next Tuesday. Hey, look, I want to thank you guys for listening. Again, I've got a good show coming up on Thursday. If you want to know what it's like being, in the thick of this thing, I mean, and all of the emotional battle from somebody who I consider a friend of mine, who went into this quote unquote war zone, and I don't even know if I like that analogy, but went into this crisis zone, still having not even totally been able to cope and mourn the loss of her husband. So I've got Kat Carnes joining me this Thursday on Let's Talk with Regan and Reggie. So please tune us in. Check us out. Even if you can't watch it or hear it live, look for Let's Talk with John Kane. That's my WBI show in New York City. I'll look for that this Thursday or anytime after that. And tell me what you think. I'd like to hear what your comments are. So again, I want to thank you for listening. This is John Kane. This is Let's Talk Native. Yahweh.